Fleet Speaker Vashari had been wrong before. Not often, not in ways that mattered, but she had been wrong, and each time she had corrected herself quietly, filed the new data, updated her models, and moved forward without fuss. That was what made her good at her job. Not brilliance, not instinct. The willingness to look at a number that didn't fit and change her mind before it cost her anything. She was thinking about this as she stood at the front of the briefing hall aboard the Unbroken Reach, her fleet's command ship, pointing at a star map that covered the entire far wall. 7 systems, she said, all tagged containment passive, no military escalation required, no active threat posture needed. The junior strategists in their seats wrote it down. Vashari looked at the cluster of human space on the map. Small, dim, a smear of light at the edge of Dominion territory, surrounded on 3 sides by Dominion-controlled sectors. The humans had been there for centuries. They had pushed occasionally. They had made noise. They had done what humans always did, fought each other as much as they fought anyone else, burned energy on internal conflicts, exhausted their resources on short-term problems. Humans exhaust themselves, she said. You need only wait. The junior strategists nodded. She believed it almost entirely. The anomaly report came to her 3 days later, slipped onto her table by a young intelligence officer named Orath, who looked like he hadn't slept properly in a week. He set it down beside her meal tray without making eye contact, which told her he already knew she wasn't going to like it. She picked it up. 43 blackouts across human space in the past 6 months, each one short, each one in a different sector, each one with a clean technical explanation: solar interference, equipment cycling, scheduled maintenance windows. The kind of thing that showed up in routine logs and got filed away without a second thought. Except there were 43 of them. And they weren't random. Vashari read the report twice. She set it face down on the table. She looked at her food. She cut it into smaller pieces, then smaller again until the pieces were too small to cut further and she was just pressing the blade against the plate. She put the utensil down. She picked the report back up and read it a 3rd time. 43 blackouts, 6 months, always brief, always explainable, always in sectors that bordered a specific band of space, a corridor that ran from the human outer systems inward, like a long, careful line someone had drawn through the dark without anyone noticing. She told herself it was nothing, coincidence, a pattern that looked like a pattern because her brain was built to find patterns, not because one was actually there. She almost believed it. She set the report face down again and finished her meal. That night she drafted a Priority 1 alert to the High Council. She got the opening right. She got the background summary right. She got the threat assessment framing right. Then she reached the 3rd paragraph where she had to write the words that actually mattered, and she stopped. She sat there for a long time. The words in the 3rd paragraph were: Asterisk, current intelligence suggests that human blackouts across the outer sectors may represent coordinated concealment activity rather than routine technical events. Recommend immediate deep scan of the border corridor and reassessment of containment passive classification. She read them back. Then she thought about what would happen when she sent it. The council would want details she didn't have yet. They would ask her why she hadn't flagged this sooner, why the intelligence division under her supervision had taken 6 months to notice the pattern. They would look at her 40 years of service and find this one moment, and hold it up next to everything else. And the honest answer was that there was no good reason. She had the data, she had the trained staff, she had the tools. She had just been sure it wasn't necessary. She deleted the draft. She told herself she would gather more evidence first, make the case cleaner, come to the council with a complete picture instead of a half-formed concern. She told herself that. She went asleep. The observation deck of the Unbroken Reach, ran the full length of the ship's upper spine, nearly 400 meters of reinforced transparent alloy with nothing between you and open space, but a handspan of material designed to withstand weapons fire. Vashari walked it alone that night, as she did most nights when something was sitting in her chest that she hadn't named yet. The Dominion fleet was arranged in loose formation around her. 700 ships, cruisers, carriers, patrol cutters, the heavy guns of the forward line. The combined firepower of the Dominion's second reach, which had not fired a single weapon in 8 years because nothing had required it. At the edge of sensor range, barely a smear on the long-distance display, human space sat quiet. She looked at it for a long time. The stars on that side of the map were the same as every other side. The same cold light, the same distances, the same silence between things. Nothing looked different about that particular region of space. Nothing announced itself. Nothing sent up a signal that said, "Look closer, something is changing here, something has already changed." The fleet around her was calm. The crew rotations were running on schedule. The night watch was quiet. The asterisk unbroken reach moved in its slow patrol arc the way it had moved every night for 3 years. Everything was calm. That was the last true thing Vashari knew for certain for a very long time. In the morning, Oreth filed a follow-up report. 2 more blackouts, same corridor, both brief, both explainable. He flagged them for standard review. Vashari saw the flag in her morning log. She marked it reviewed and moved to the next item. She had 40 years of being right behind her. She had a fully armed fleet around her. She had a threat assessment that said containment passive, and 40 years of evidence that humans exhausted themselves if you gave them enough time. She moved to the next item. Outside, in the dark between the stars, something that had been rehearsing for 11 years continued to rehearse. It did not exhaust itself. It did not make noise. It waited, the way only something deeply patient can wait, not like something holding its breath, but like something that had already decided how this ended and was simply moving through the steps, one careful step at a time, until the last piece was in place. Vashari did not know this. She would. The human comm channels went silent at 300 hours, Galactic Standard. Not jammed, not disrupted, not the static-heavy interference of equipment failure or the hard cutoff of a signal being blocked. Just silence, clean and total, the way a room goes silent when everyone in it decides at the same moment to stop talking. 1 second there was the low background noise of human traffic across the border sectors, the routine chatter of civilian frequencies and merchant transponders that Dominion monitoring stations had been logging for years. The next second there was nothing. The operator on night watch, a young woman named Seville, stared at her display for a full 30 seconds before she accepted what she was seeing. She filed a standard log entry. She flagged it for morning review. She noted the time and went back to her other screens. She didn't wake Vashari. There were rules about when to wake the fleet speaker, and a calm silence event that had 3 possible technical explanations didn't meet the threshold. Seville was thorough and careful and very good at following rules. The morning review never happened. At 300 hours and 14 seconds, the Dominion long-range sensor grid picked up nothing in the border corridor. At 300 hours and 15 seconds, it picked up everything. The ships were not arriving. They were not decelerating out of faster-than-light travel the way ships decelerated, the long bloom of displaced energy, the gradual sharpening of a contact from blur to solid form, the approach vector that gave you time to calculate and respond and make decisions. There was none of that. 1 second the corridor was empty. The next second it was full. All of them at once. Already there. The sensor operator on the forward tracking station, a different operator from Seville, a man named Dross who had been doing this job for 11 years and had never once filed an emergency report, looked at his display, and said nothing for a moment that lasted too long. Then he opened a channel to the asterisk unbroken reach and said, "Fleet Speaker, I'm reading a ghost on long range. Multiple contacts, border corridor. Sector 7 through Sector 12. Vashari was awake in seconds. She had been a light sleeper for most of her adult life. Classification: unknown hull types. I'm running it again. It's probably interference. There was a comm silence event 20 minutes ago. Could be related equipment. How many contacts? A pause. A lot, Fleet Speaker. She was on the bridge in 4 minutes. The second contact report came in while she was pulling up the tactical display. Dross's voice was the same as before, careful and measured, but the pitch had moved up by something small and important. Still reading the contacts. They're not resolving as ghosts. I have confirmed mass readings. These are real ships. Vashari looked at the display. She looked at the numbers. Then she looked at the numbers again. The way you look at a word you've read 100 times and suddenly can't recognize. 53 human vessels for every one Dominion ship, arranged in a formation that covered the entire border corridor from edge to edge, deep enough that the rearmost elements were outside standard engagement range. And beyond them, 300 additional vessels that didn't match a single hull classification in the entire Dominion database. Not modified versions of known types, not upgraded variants, something else entirely. Something that had been built without Dominion intelligence ever seeing a blueprint or a test flight, or a single whisper of its existence. Fleet Speaker, her tactical officer Marin said it quietly, "They're real. I know they're real. All of them. I know." She stood there for a moment and let the number settle into her. She had spent 40 years trusting math. The math in front of her was not comfortable. She ordered a standard defensive array. Protocol clean, precisely correct, the response the Dominion fleet doctrine had developed over 2 centuries of engagement theory. Ships moved into position with the efficiency of a crew that had drilled this scenario hundreds of times. The human fleet did not respond. It held position, every single vessel from the outermost rearguard to the forward line sitting completely still, weapons status unreadable at this range, no approach vector, no targeting signals on Dominion frequencies, nothing. Just 53-1, holding, waiting. Vashari understood, in some part of her that worked faster than conscious thought, that the waiting was deliberate. That someone on the other side of that formation had made a decision about the waiting specifically, had chosen it, calibrated it, known exactly what it would feel like to be on the receiving end of it. 5 minutes passed. 10. The human fleet did not move. "What are they doing?" Marin asked. Vashari didn't answer, because the answer was obvious and she didn't want to say it out loud. They were letting the Dominion fleet look at the numbers. That was all. No attack, no posturing, no escalating signals. Just, here is what is in front of you. Look at it. Understand it. Take as long as you need. The transmission came at 3:17 hours. One signal, human origin. No encryption, broadcast on every frequency the Dominion fleet used simultaneously, so that every officer on every ship heard it at exactly the same moment. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a list of demands. It was 7 words in standard Dominion trade tongue, delivered in a flat, even voice that contained nothing, no anger, no triumph, no threat in the tone itself. Just words, the way you'd read coordinates off a screen. "Move your fleets, you have 1 hour. Then silence. No follow-up, no elaboration, no name or rank or ship ID attached to the transmission. The human fleet went back to holding position as if the message had never been sent, as if the hour was already running and they had already stopped thinking about it. Vashari stared at the display. 700 Dominion ships, The combined firepower of the second reach, 40 years of correct decisions behind her, a threat assessment that said containment passive, an anomaly report she had marked reviewed without reading twice. She looked at the 300 unclassified human vessels at the back of the formation, the ones that had no entry in any database, that had been built in total silence during 6 months of careful, explainable blackouts, and she felt something shift behind her sternum that she had no good word for. Fleet Speaker, Marin was watching her. Your orders. She opened her mouth. Closed it. 40 years of being right. 1 hour. She pulled up the emergency channel to the High Council and started talking. The hour ran. Every minute of it was its own kind of quiet. The crew of the Asterisk Unbroken Reach moved carefully, spoke in low voices, checked and rechecked systems that were already running perfectly. Nobody said what everyone was thinking. Nobody looked too long at the numbers on the tactical display. The human fleet held position without moving, without signaling, without doing anything at all except existing in the space it had filled without warning at 300 hours and 15 seconds. At 4:17 hours, the High Council's response came through. Counter-engagement, standard escalation protocol, full authorization. Vashari read the order. She looked at the display. She executed the order. The Dominion fleet moved forward. The human fleet watched it come. And then the vanishing began. The first Dominion ship to go was the Asterisk Steady Veil Asterisk. Vashari saw it on the tactical display, a solid contact marker, green, steady, the kind of reading that meant a ship was exactly where it was supposed to be and doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Then it was gone. No explosion, no reactor bloom, no debris cloud spreading outward in that slow, terrible flower shape that meant something had died. The marker was there, and then the marker was not there, and the space where the steady veil had been was clean and empty, as if the ship had never existed at all. Her tactical officer, Marin, said nothing. The second ship went 11 seconds later, the third 4 seconds after that. What is happening to them? Marin's voice was very controlled. Too controlled in the way that voices get when the person using them is making a deliberate choice about how to sound. I don't know, Vashari said. It was the first time she had said those words on a bridge in 40 years. She ordered the fleet to pull back to defensive range. Standard withdrawal pattern, clean angles, the kind of movement that reduced exposure while maintaining formation integrity. Ships moved. More markers vanished. Not in clusters, one at a time or two or three, spaced across the formation in a pattern that felt almost methodical, like something working through a list. No wreckage, no distress signal, no last transmissions. Gone. The human fleet still hadn't moved. It sat in its formation, all 53-1 of it, watching. The 300 unclassified vessels at the rear hadn't come forward. They were just present, the way a wall is present, not threatening, not advancing, simply there and solid and not going anywhere. Vashari's sensor chief pulled up the engagement data and stared at it. I'm not reading weapons fire, he said. No energy discharge, no projectile tracking, no beam signatures. Whatever is removing our ships, it's not a weapon, not any kind we have a classification for. Then what is it? He looked up from his screen. I don't know how to answer that. The answer came in pieces, the way bad answers always come. Not all at once, not cleanly, but in fragments that her surviving officers assembled across 3 desperate minutes, while the Dominion fleet count dropped from 700 to 400 and falling. The calm blackouts, the 6 months of short, explainable silences along the border corridor, the pattern she had seen in the anomaly report and set face down on her table. Not communication blackouts. Calibration runs. Whatever the humans had built, and her science officer was using words Vashari only half understood, gravitational harmonics, spatial fold resonance, things that belonged in theoretical research papers rather than an active engagement. It needed precise calibration across a very specific corridor of space. You had to map the corridor exactly. You had to run tests and adjust and run tests again until the numbers were right. You had to do it quietly, in short windows, in ways that each looked like nothing on their own. 6 months, 43 blackouts, one long, careful line through the dark. Her theoretical division had reviewed the underlying physics 3 years ago. The report they filed classified it as physically implausible. The report was 400 pages. Vashari had read the executive summary. She had filed it away. Turns out implausible and impossible are only the same word if you've never met someone who needed it badly enough. Down to 260 ships. Then 190. Then 90. The human formation hadn't moved forward, hadn't changed shape, hadn't done anything that looked like an aggressive push. The vanishings just continued, steady, spaced, unhurried, like something that wasn't in a rush because it didn't need to be. Vashari kept trying to find the move, the right response, the right counter, the right decision that would change the math. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. 40 years of finding the answer before the situation forced it on her. The answers weren't there. Every counter she modeled ran into the same problem. She didn't know where the weapon was. She couldn't target what she couldn't locate. She couldn't shield against something she had no emission signature for. She couldn't retreat fast enough to exit the corridor's range before more ships were gone. Down to 60. 40. 11. The High Council's transmission cut out at the 40-ship mark. Static, then nothing. No sign-off. No final instruction. Just the channel going dead mid-sentence, which told her everything she didn't want to know about what had happened to whoever was on the other end. She didn't let herself decide which possibility was true. There was no version that helped her, so she set it aside and looked at what was in front of her. 11 ships. 412 human vessels. Still in formation, still unscratched, still holding with the patience of something that had decided in advance how this ended. She could run. The FTL drives were still operational on all 11 remaining ships. She could plot a course to Dominion core space, 4 hours, maybe 5, file her report, hand this problem to people with more resources and more time to solve it. That was the rational move. That was what the doctrine said. Orath appeared at her shoulder. He was 23 years old. He had brought her the anomaly report 6 months ago and set it on her table without making eye contact, and she had read it and set it face down. And now, he was standing next to her on a bridge with 11 ships left and looking at her with the face of someone who still believed she had a plan. She looked at him. She looked at the display. She thought about the deleted draft, the 3rd paragraph. The words she had written and then removed because writing them would have meant admitting she wasn't certain, and certainty was the thing she had built her entire career on top of, and she hadn't been able to give it up for an anomaly report and a pattern that might have been coincidence. Humans are not tiring, humans are rehearsing. She had written that. She had written it and then she had deleted it, and the universe had spent 6 months proving it was the truest thing she'd ever put on a page. She didn't say any of this out loud. She pulled up the broadcast channel. The surrender came out in clean, flat trade tongue. 11 ships, full stop, no resistance. The human response came back in 6 words. Same channel, same even voice that had given them the hour. Come aboard, you'll be treated well. That was all. Vashari stood at the observation deck one last time as the docking procedures began. Same deck, same transparent alloy, same stars in the same positions they had always been. The space where 700 ships had been was empty and clean. The stars looked the same. That was the worst part, that nothing out there looked different. No scar on the sky, no mark left by what had happened. The dark between the stars was the same dark it had always been, and it kept no record of what had just occurred in it. Vashari looked at it for a long time. Then she went to meet whatever came next. The bridge of the asterisk constant shore smelled like coffee and recycled air, and the particular kind of sweat that came from people who had been awake for 22 hours waiting for something to either happen or not happen. It happened. Admiral Nora Ewan stood at the main display and watched the last 11 Dominion contact markers stop moving. Full stop. Broadcast surrender on the open channel, clean and complete, no conditions attached. Around her, her officers were doing the thing crews do when something enormous finishes. The slow exhale, the loosening of shoulders, someone in the back row saying something that made two other people laugh, the sound of hands being shaken and backs being slapped, and the general human noise of relief finding its way out of bodies that had been holding it in for a very long time. Ewan looked at the display. The space where 700 ships had been was clean. Her communications officer, a young man named Briggs who had been on her crew for 3 years and still occasionally looked at her like he wasn't sure she was real, turned from his station and said, "Admiral, do you want to make a ship-wide announcement?" She thought about it for a moment. "No," she said. He nodded like he understood, which she doubted, but she appreciated the nod anyway. She was 54 years old. She had grown up in the harbor district of what used to be San Francisco, watching cargo ships move in and out of the bay from a window above a restaurant her mother ran for 30 years. She had joined the United Earth Navy at 18 because the harbor made her feel like the world was larger than the street she lived on, and she had wanted to find out exactly how much larger it was. She found out. She made admiral at 41, youngest in Pacific Command history, which people mentioned often enough that it had stopped meaning anything to her. The rank came with an office, a staff, a set of responsibilities that expanded every year, and a file that lived in the bottom drawer of her desk that she opened every single mission, without exception, before she filed her action report. She opened it now. 3 sets of coordinates, 3 dates, 11 years old, 3 colony worlds that the Dominion had quietly, efficiently, and without any formal declaration removed from existence after a human intelligence officer filed a threat assessment that Dominion monitoring stations had intercepted and decoded within 72 hours. The populations of those worlds were listed by number in the file. Ewan did not read the numbers. She knew them. She had known them for 11 years, the way you know the dimensions of a room you've stood in too many times. She looked at the coordinates. She closed the file, faster than usual. She didn't know what that meant. She didn't look at it too hard. The idea for Project Dawn had come to her 3 weeks after the colony worlds. She had been sitting in a debrief room on Earth, listening to senior officers discuss response options, and every option they discussed had the same shape: strike back, hit specific targets, make the Dominion understand there was a cost. Fast, loud, the kind of response that felt like doing something. She had sat there and listened and thought, that is exactly what they expect. Humans were emotional. Humans were impulsive. Humans reacted. The Dominion had spent 2 centuries building that understanding into their threat models, and they weren't wrong. Humans were all of those things, loudly and often. But the Dominion had made the mistake that everyone made when they studied humanity's history of conflict and drew conclusions from it. They looked at how humans fought. They didn't ask how humans decided when to stop. She had written the Project Dawn proposal in 4 days. 11 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago. She had walked it into the office of the Chief of Naval Operations and set it on his desk and said, "I don't gamble. I wait until it's not gambling anymore. Give me 11 years and we won't have to gamble." He had looked at the proposal for a long time. Then he had picked up a pen and signed the authorization. She went to meet Vashari herself. No escort, no formal procedure, no staff. She walked down to the receiving bay where the 11 Dominion ships had docked and found Vashari standing in the corridor outside the airlock, straight-backed, composed, wearing the expression of someone who had decided in advance not to show anything and was holding to that decision with both hands. They were roughly the same height, both past 50, both with the particular stillness of people who had spent decades making large decisions in small rooms. Yuan looked at her for a moment. Then she walked to the small briefing room at the end of the corridor and waited. Vashari followed. They stood across a standard-issue table from each other in a room with nothing on the walls. Yuan didn't offer a seat. Vashari didn't ask for one. There was no speech. There was nothing that needed performing. The display board outside this room had 412 human vessels on it, all undamaged, and 0 Dominion ships that were still a functioning military force, and those numbers had already said the only thing that needed saying. Yuan asked one question. "Did you read the gravity report?" Vashari looked at her steadily. It was classified implausible. Yuan nodded once. She left. The action report took her 11 minutes to write, 4 sentences. She read it back once, changed one word, read it back again. Briggs was waiting outside the door of her quarters when she came back with the filed report in hand. He had that look again, the one that was trying to be professional and not quite getting there. "The crew is asking," he said carefully, "if there's going to be any kind of acknowledgement of what happened tonight. Some of them have been on this ship for the full project. 7 years, 8 years. Yuan looked at him. He was 26 years old. He had never seen a colony world. He had joined the Navy 4 years after the last one went dark, drawn by the same pull she had felt at 18, the harbor, the ships, the world being larger than the street. "Tell them well done," she said. "Tell them to get some sleep. That's all. That's all." He nodded and went. She stood in the corridor alone for a moment, outside her quarters, not going in yet. The ship hummed around her, the normal sounds of a vessel running at standard operations. Nothing urgent, nothing broken, everything exactly as it should be. She thought about the file in her drawer, the coordinates, the numbers she didn't read anymore because she already knew them. She thought about closing it faster than usual and what that might mean, and whether it meant anything at all or whether she was just tired. She was very tired. She went inside. The stars outside her window looked the same as they always had, the same cold light, the same distances, the same silence. The same stars that looked down on 3 sets of coordinates 11 years ago and were still looking now, unchanged, keeping no record of anything. Somewhere across the dark, what remained of the Dominion was waking up to what the morning looked like. Yuan did not think about this for very long. She had a file in her drawer. She had 4 sentences in an action report. She had 11 years of one careful step at a time. It was done. Whatever that meant, it was done. She had been so certain back then that she would feel different when it was. She turned off the light. Outside, the stars kept their silence, the way they always had, the way they always would, patient and permanent and utterly indifferent to the things that happened in the dark between them. The Dominion High Council chamber was built to hold 41 members. 9 were present. 3 were attending remotely, their faces on wall screens, because they were on ships that were now in human custody, and the humans had been decent enough to allow a secure transmission window twice a day. The other 29 were simply not there, and nobody in the chamber was saying out loud what that meant, because saying it out loud would make the next question unavoidable, which was what exactly the Dominion High Council was now, with 9 members in a room built for 41. Vashari stood at the center of the chamber floor. She had spent 4 days writing her testimony notes. She had written 30 pages. She had cut it to 12. She had cut it again to 4, and then she had put the 4 pages in her bag, walked to the hearing and not looked at them once. She didn't need the pages. She knew what she had to say. The question was whether she had the courage to say it in a way that was actually useful, rather than in the careful, qualified, technically accurate way that sounded like an explanation, but was really just a wall to hide behind. Fleet Speaker Vashari, the council member running the hearing, was a small, precise woman named Edrath who had survived the engagement only because she had been on a diplomatic transit vessel outside the border corridor when it happened. She had the look of someone who was holding herself together through sheer administrative habit. You commanded the second reach at the time of engagement. In your assessment, what failed? Vashari looked at her. I did, she said. Edrath wanted more than that. Of course she did. The council wanted a systems failure, an intelligence breakdown, a specific technical gap that could be identified and filled and used to argue that the defeat was a solvable problem rather than a foundational one. They wanted the kind of answer that came with a corrective action plan attached. Vashari gave them the honest answer instead. The human weapon is not the problem, she said. The weapon is a symptom. We can study it. We can attempt to reverse engineer the principles behind it. We can put our best theoretical minds on the physics and come back in 5 years with a counter-proposal. That is the wrong question. Then what is the right question? Edrath asked. How did they build it without us knowing? Vashari let that sit for a moment. Not the technical answer. We know the technical answer. They used maintenance windows and brief calibration runs, and they were very careful and very patient. The real answer is, we knew something was happening and we chose not to look at it. One of the remote council members leaned forward on his screen. You're saying this was an intelligence failure. I'm saying this was a certainty failure, Vashari said. We were certain humans were manageable. We built every system we had around that certainty. When data arrived that didn't fit the certainty, we found ways to make it fit. 43 anomalous events across a 6-month window, forming a clear pattern along a specific corridor, and we classified them as routine and moved on. Not because the evidence supported that classification, because it was easier than being wrong. The chamber was quiet. I wrote a Priority 1 alert to this council, she said. 3 months before the engagement, I deleted it before I sent it. Nobody asked why. Nobody had to. The question she had been waiting for came from the youngest council member, a man named Savrath who looked like he had not slept in 4 days and was making poor decisions about hiding it. How long were they planning this? He asked. 11 years, Vashari said. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one before it. 11 years, Savrath said. He said it the way you repeat something when your brain hasn't finished deciding whether it's real. For this one operation. For this specific engagement, yes. He stopped, started again. That's not how humans operate. Everything we know about human strategic behavior says they escalate fast, they commit hard, they burn energy on immediate responses. They aren't patient. They don't plan across 11-year windows. Vashari looked at him. She thought about the observation deck of the Unbroken Reach asterisk. The stars over human space, quiet and dim at the edge of sensor range. 700 ships around her, calm, armed, untested. She thought about standing there and telling herself that humans exhausted themselves. We were correct about how humans fight, she said. We studied their history and we drew the right conclusions from it. Humans are emotional. They are impulsive. They escalate quickly and commit hard and burn through resources on short-term problems. Every conflict in their recorded history supports that reading. She paused. What we never studied was how humans decide when to stop fighting and start preparing. Nobody spoke. When they are hurt badly enough, not threatened, not pressured, but genuinely deeply hurt, they go quiet. They stop being impulsive. They become the most patient species I have ever encountered any record of. They decide what needs to be done. Then they do it, one careful step at a time, for as long as it takes. She looked at the 9 remaining council members in a room built for 41. They needed 11 years to be certain, so they took 11 years. The salvage report came through during a recess. Dominion recovery crews had swept the engagement corridor looking for wreckage, debris, any physical remnant of the 500 ships that had vanished. They found clean space, no debris fields, no hull fragments, nothing that would allow reconstruction of what had happened to the ships or where they had gone. They found one thing: a single communications buoy, Dominion frequency, encrypted in standard trade tongue, positioned at the geometric center of the engagement corridor, small enough that it had been easy to miss in the first 2 sweeps, old enough that the outer casing had the particular dull surface of something that had been sitting in space for a long time. 11 years old. Inside the buoy, 3 sets of coordinates and 3 dates, nothing else. No message, no name, no explanation of what the coordinates meant or why they had been left there. Vashari knew what they meant. She had read Ewan's debrief files during the transit back. She knew about the colony worlds. She knew about the intelligence officer who had filed the threat assessment 11 years ago and what had happened in the 72 hours after the Dominion monitoring stations decoded it. She did not explain what the coordinates meant to the Council. Some things did not need explaining to people who were willing to think. After the recess, Edrath asked the final question. "What do you recommend?" Vashari had written 12 pages of recommendations. She had cut them to 4 pages. She had cut them again to 1 page, and then she had looked at the 1 page and understood that everything on it was still the wrong answer dressed in the right language. She put the page away. "Compliance," she said. Edrath frowned. "Define compliance." "It means we stop deciding in advance what humans are and are not capable of. It means when their officers file threat assessments, we read them, all of them, not the summaries. It means when data arrives that doesn't fit our existing models, we update the models instead of the data." She looked around the room. "It means we accept that we were wrong about what they are, and we rebuild every assumption we have from the ground up, starting today." "And if they escalate further?" Sovrath asked. "If this was not the end of it but the beginning?" Vashari thought about the 7 words on the open channel, the flat, even voice, the hour that ran in silence while the human fleet simply held position and waited. She thought about Ewan in the briefing room, asking one question, and then leaving without waiting for anything more than the answer. "They gave us 1 hour, Vashari said. "They have been carrying what they carried for 11 years, and they gave us 1 hour to move before they acted. That is not the behavior of something looking for more war." She paused. "That is the behavior of something that wanted this to be finished. We should do everything in our power to make sure they remain finished." The chamber was quiet. Outside, through the high windows of the council building, the sky above the Dominion capital was the early gray of pre-dawn. The stars were fading. The city below was just beginning to make its morning sounds, the low hum of transit systems, the first lights coming on in buildings, the ordinary noise of a world waking up to a morning that looked identical to every other morning from the outside. Vashari stood in the center of a room built for 41 and listened to it. Somewhere past the edge of every sensor the Dominion had left, 7 human systems sat in the dark, quiet and still. Not exhausted. Not finished. Simply done, for now, with what it needed doing, patient as stone, steady as the dark between stars, waiting with the particular stillness of something that had learned a very long time ago that the most dangerous thing in any room was not the loudest voice. It was the one that had already decided, and said nothing, until it was ready.